All right, you can see my screen all right?
Hang on just a second. All right, Kyle, we're recording. Go ahead.
Okay, awesome. I'm Kyle Schumacher, coordinating wildlife biologist for Northern Prairies Land Trust in the Verdigris-Bazile biologically unique landscape. And so the Verdigris-Bazile BUL is located in northeast Nebraska, kind of nested for the most part within Knox County, but also includes a little bit of Antelope, Holt, and Boyd counties as well. It is primarily encompasses the last 30 or so miles of the Niobrara River, the Verdigris Creek running kind of southwest through Knox County, Bazile Creek running right through the central part of Knox County, along the Missouri River Bluffs, all the way over to essentially Lewis, the Gavin's Point Dam at Lewis Clark Lake, and then also Ponca Creek and the Missouri River running through kind of that northwest side of the map over there. As you kind of look at the map, you can see almost 443,000 acres of rangelands, 84,000 acres of forested lands, and 16,000 acres of woodlands intermixed within a landscape with a lot of production agriculture as well. So some unique challenges and opportunities that go along with that. For legacy species in the BUL, it's really kind of just chock full of them, ones that we're watching for bird species, wood thrush, buff-breasted sandpiper, short-eared owl, piping plover, least tern. Usually in the spring and the fall, there's one or two family groups of whooping cranes that move through, black-billed cuckoos. In our woodlands, we have some pretty unique areas that listed legacy bat species, like this tricolored bat pictured here. And it's a pretty intense landscape with a lot of competition on any given year between our rangelands that are really truly working lands, on top of kind of the back and forth that goes with being in a landscape with a heavy component of agriculture as well. So it's an intense landscape with wildlife that are surprisingly thriving throughout it, that in other areas of the range in a similar setting might not be doing so well. It's also critical habitat for migratory species. The wetlands that are scattered throughout the BUL, whether they're along our riparian areas or more kind of playa wetlands. They host a lot of waterfowl and shorebirds during both the fall and the spring migration. And then even into some of our more aquatic life, one of the few BULs where we have blandings turtles doing perceivedly okay. So the Verdigris-Bazile BUL, it's an area worth conserving, and I firmly believe that, and the landowners and the agencies that work in this area firmly believe that as well. So how have we gotten to the point where we have through this natural legacy project, through my position, which has been around for about 15 years or so? I've been in this position for just shy of 2 years. How are we managing this BUL, trying to save what we can and make the most of what we can? And I guess going forward here, our approach in the background has always kind of been find good areas of habitat and build off of that. Now it's more of a strategic effort to do that. It's to find these core areas of wetlands, like what we see along the blue running up and down our river drainages, or core areas of grasslands, like in our yellow polygons there. And then as those that we've been kind of developing, but now we're also working with some of our partners to develop core areas of a core area of woodland there, kind of running along the Bazile Creek on the east side of the map there. So let's start with our wetlands. Through the Wetland Reserve Program, late 2000s, early 2010s, Scott Wessel, along with Becca Jessen, who was kind of in the lineage of biologists in this position here, a lot of their focus was working with the NRCS and working with private landowners to set up conservation easements to protect the wetlands within the BUL, some are more threatened areas. And it was largely pretty successful. As you can see on the map running the Bazile Creek there on the east side of the map, the Verdigris Creek, the Niobrara River, and the Missouri River, we really have a neat wetland complex that's protected in perpetuity for the conservation of these wetlands and to maintain them as healthy wetlands and to keep them functioning through all the ecosystem services that they provide. For the Bazile Creek, that consists of 24 voluntary easements equaling up to almost 2,400 acres of wetlands being protected. Where the Bazile Creek comes into the Missouri River on the north side of the Nebraska border there, it's right after where the Niobrara comes in, but a little bit before some of the slack waters of Lewis and Clark Lake as the Missouri River comes into that, before those have quite built up that far. And so it really provides a unique habitat where we find a lot of our legacy project at-risk fish species, including flathead chub, western black-nosed dace, blunt-nosed minnow. Those are all species that we've documented using the Bazile Creek in its entirety along those wetland easements. Along the Niobrara River and the Verdigris Creek, kind of running west out of Knox County and then south through Knox County there also. Those are 45 different voluntary easements of private landowners where we're protecting almost 6,400 acres of wetlands in the riparian areas around those wetlands. So not just the wetlands, but the riparian cottonwood forests that run along the Niobrara River, some of the oak savannas and oak woodlands that abut up right next to right up next to the Niobrara and the Verdigris Creek. Really just some really neat properties with unique habitat deserving protection. And then finally, we have the Missouri River easements, 13 different voluntary easements conserving over 3,000 acres of wetlands, protecting those in perpetuity, including Niobrara Confluence Wildlife Management Area, right west of Niobrara State Park there. And, you know, these wetlands are critical for our birds that are using the river corridor as migratory routes, or in the summer as nesting habitat, and specifically habitat opportunities for stopover for migrating whooping cranes, or nesting cover for some of our endangered or protected species like the bald eagle, interior release tern, and piping plover. And just because we have these wetlands under easements doesn't mean that that's the only wetland conservation that's going on in the area. Those are just kind of the anchors to this whole system of wetland conservation in the BUL across a number of different and diverse funding partners and conservation partners. Looking back on some information for our wetland easements, I actually came across Scott Wessel and Becca Jessen's legacy talk from 2011. And this is one of the slides from that talk. Is it said forever is a long time, and so managing these wetlands so that they're able to be maintained, you know, even just 5 years can be a challenge. So making sure that those wetlands have the longevity of and the health that they need to be functional is quite a challenge. And so we just because those easements aren't in place doesn't mean that the management, or there's no management that's involved. We're actively always trying to work to get prescribed fire into those wetlands, controlling invasive species in those wetlands through chemical application, brush management. It's amazing where a cedar tree can grow in some of those wet areas, but then also monitoring those at-risk species and our threatened and endangered species that use those wetlands to make sure that the conservation work that we're doing on the landscape in those wetlands is actually working for them and actually benefiting them. So with that, moving on to our grassland core areas. And here this last year, we've always been always been trying to conserve the grasslands in the BUL, but now we have this concerted effort across multiple partners in this battle for a biome, this battle for the last really intact grasslands within the BUL. And you see on the right, the percent tree cover percentages that are just rapidly increasing over the last 20 years. That's not unique to this area, but it is definitely impacting this area, especially the grasslands. And so we see in 2000 kind of a heat map of where our seed sources are trying to expand into our grasslands. So the blue, those are healthy grasslands, or healthy grasslands in the sense of being relatively tree-free and tree seed source free. And as we see, as we advance to 2018, a rapid expansion of, this isn't a tree cover map, but this is a more of kind of a risk assessment map of where the grasslands are at. How do we, how much effort is it going to take to continue to conserve those grasslands? And so what we were able to do working with University of Nebraska Lincoln researchers is to identify 2 core areas of grassland that we're going to anchor conservation efforts off of. And that's not to ignore everywhere else, as we're going to see here, but maybe make more efforts to try and recruit projects in those areas, recruit landowners in those areas to bring tools back into the system that we might have taken out of the toolbox. So that first step, defend the core areas. That involves creating or maintaining our grasslands, or getting our grasslands back to a state of being tree-free and tree seed-free. So like this area from some pasture ground southeast of Verdigris, that's this east core, kind of a pretty good view of it. Yes, there's a lot of trees, but there was even more trees here just a few years ago. These landowners have bought into prescribed burning and are implementing it on a landscape scale through there. And we're starting to expand that area to have multi-landowner burns, to have bigger burns, burns that are targeting taller trees, but then also burns now that we're getting to that point of around 2 or 3 of fire, where we're maintaining the grasslands instead of using just a brush management tool. So then coming in and having some specific brush management practices, mechanical removal, as a secondary effort on top of prescribed fire as our #1 tool on the landscape. Or out here in eastern Holt County on our western, on that core area over in the northwest corner of the BUL, where we have this landowner who has a 9,000 acre ranch, relatively cedar tree free, within his grasslands, and that's nested within another 15,000 acre grassland complex that we think with just a little bit of effort we can get the work done in there, so that we can expand out from there. So what do these projects look like to establish the core? Like I said, it's prescribed fire, and it's locating tree removal projects and other habitat intervention practices to expand those grassland cores and to secure those as the grasslands that they are. Next step, grow and connect the cores. So we're moving out from those grasslands and heading up north on that east core, and west over here towards Grove Lake, to a ridge that kind of runs north of Grove Lake, and then up to areas where we already have landowners that are putting fire on the ground at large scales, and burning at 500, 600, 700 acres at a time. And then finally, the next step is, just because we have these core areas doesn't mean that we're constricted to working within just these core areas. We have other really important areas on the landscape, areas where we have a prescribed burn association very active, areas where we have landowner buy-in for fire and maintaining their grasslands with fire. Other resources like Bohemia Prairie Wildlife Management Area, which is nested within another 3,000 acre complex, but relatively surrounded by a lot of red. And then other major landholding groups like the Santee Sioux Nation, who actively uses fire as their own crew that goes and cuts cedar trees, does a lot of good things on the landscape. So like I said, here's an example of landowners there just west of Niobrara that are bought into fire. And yes, they have a tree issue, but we're working with them. It's just maybe to a lesser component than we traditionally did, seeking out projects like this, but using fire as that first tool and then coming back into this with mechanical methods to kind of clean up afterwards. Or Bohemia Prairie here, nested within a 3,000 acre grassland complex that, you know, might be hard to get it much bigger than 3,000 acres right now as we work in these other areas and start fighting to get back to this, but an area that's relatively tree and seed free that we can maintain in that state. Or multi-generational ranches and farms that cattle, running cattle is kind of their way of life. And so preserving that for them, preserving that hunting heritage, preserving that just appreciation for wildlife on these working lands in the BUL. So we've talked about our grasslands, we've talked about our wetlands, and now what's next is our woodlands. And this is just a little bit different because this is still in the very elementary phases of developing a core area that all of our partners can work across. The Verdigris-Bazile BUL's woodlands are just full of tier 1 and tier 2 species that we're keeping our eyes out for and actively working to conserve. This region is also an area that has a lot of overlap between our other conservation partners. For example, the Nebraska Forest Service, right there is the BUL. And so this is one of their forest legacy areas. So that provides unique opportunities to make our dollar and their dollar go further in working with landowners to create healthy woodlands and to start, like I said, putting tools back in the toolbox that we haven't been able to use for quite some time. So this core area that we're working on is right around, just northeast of that core grassland area down here. And this is where we want to expand our core grassland area. Here we have all of these wetland easements. So this kind of makes sense to couple this with all the other work that's going on in that area. It's an area that has landowner buy-in to working in the woodlands and trying to get fire back into those systems. They just might not know the best way to do that yet. We have multiple partners interested in this, whether that's the Nebraska Forest Service, USDA, NRCS, the Santee Sioux Nation, the Game and Parks Commission, a lot of people in this area that are interested in getting this type of an area set up. Like I said, proximity to those other core habitat areas. It's also a highly visible project. You can get up on a couple of the ridges in the BUL and look down into that whole bowl of a woodland setting that's there and really get a grasp of the potential that's there. And then like I showed earlier, just the amount of legacy species that could be positively impacted by impacting the woodlands in that area. That goes with a few challenges here. Getting fire into the woodlands has been a little bit of a challenge. Landowners like to burn up to the woodlands and use those as kind of fire breaks when there's still snow on the ground to get their grasslands burned, but introducing new techniques for getting fire on the ground and getting fire through the woodlands and seeing the benefits of that. We also have a little bit of difficulty getting contractors in the area that would do more work than just what a skid loader can reach. Burning across fences, burning with your neighbors. Neighbor A wants to burn, but they don't know how to stop it at their fence. Neighbor B wants to burn, but they don't know how to stop it at neighbor A's fence. So working with them to create these landowner complexes. And then with prescribed fire, a lot of that happens in this area due to snowfall, site conditions, a little different than the Southeast district, Southeast area folks. We have a really narrow fall burn window to work with in these woodlands, and a lot of times there's a lot of perceptions around the firearm deer season nested right within that. So working around that too, just a few challenges. But new opportunities coming with a new Forest Service grant that definitely includes these woodlands in this area and some new opportunities for us to work with. So recipes for success for the next decade of the legacy project, and hopefully in the next decade then coming back and seeing at the 20th anniversary of the Legacy Conference what work that we've done that we think is really going to be successful. First, like TJ talked about earlier in the week, making we become we, a bigger we. including more partners, including more parts to getting and more buy-in from everyone in the area to getting this type of work done. Multi-landowner projects, it makes that landowner's dollar go further, it makes our dollar go further, it makes the impact to the wildlife much greater in that area, especially our legacy species. Landscape level fire, burning more than just 40 to 60 acres at a time, upscaling to some of our landowners in the area burning 500, 600 acres at a time, or this last spring having a 2,000 acre burn just south of Verdell. Really making leaps and bounds there, working across multiple landowners with that too. Working in those core habitat areas to save what we can and to conserve what we can, and then expanding out from those core areas. Establish the core, expand the core. And then finally, monitoring for at-risk species, making sure that the work we're doing on the landscape is actually benefiting these species, and always keeping our eyes and ears open to how these species that are struggling otherwise are hopefully responding positively to these projects. So like I said, the Verdigris-Bazile BUL is an area that's worth conserving. I hope that this kind of showed you guys that. And with that, I'll take any questions.